like that.
Yep, that's like part of the.
Okay, here we are. Tim, take it away.
Live?
You do it better.
Awesome. Well, hey everyone, thank you for joining us for yet another live session here on LinkedIn. Today we're joined by Rick Doughton, VP of Info Security at Centene. Rick, thank you so much for joining us today. We are delighted to have you. I think I have the pleasure of asking the first question, which means we're going to get right into it. I want to ask you to talk about realistic cloud risks. And I want to suggest a format for this that an old PM manager of mine, Shreyas, liked to use. I want to talk about three categories of risk. We've got tigers, things that will actually kill you, paper tigers, things that look scary but aren't, and then elephants, things that nobody wants to talk about, but we should probably acknowledge that they're in the room before they step on us.
Yep. Oh, that's a really great way of putting it. And I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with you all. I'll start with the elephants first, really, because the elephants are kind of the fact that there might be infrastructure that goes down. 13 years ago, I was on the board of the not Cloud Security Alliance, that's the new thing, Open Data Center Alliance. And the Open Data Center Alliance in 2010, our biggest concern was cloud platforms going away. There was some, cloud instance in Europe that was being used by the Russian Business Network, and Interpol takes it down, and all your stuff is gone. And so there's a possibility that because all of your stuff is on somebody else's infrastructure, if something happens to that, then it goes away. That's kind of like the elephant that we don't want to talk about, because risk is risk, whether it's a tornado, a hurricane, an earthquake, or whatever. We have much better, business continuity now in that. I would say from the tiger that's really getting you is human error. Because, I'm very active in the Cloud Security Alliance. They have a lot of great resources. I'm on the board of our local chapter here in Charlotte. And, we've released last year the 11 top cloud security risks, similar to like the OWASP top 10. But we came up with 11 because, I don't know, maybe they like prime numbers better. But if you look at
10.
Yes, if you look at them, most of them are related to human error. Releasing using poor secrets or having the secrets disclosed publicly, not having good configuration, not keeping things patched, not having proper, controls, having, too many privileges. All of these are our fault as humans. They're not the fault of the infrastructure, of the owner of the infrastructure, not the challenges, but the fact that you have a shared service model in cloud security. That's the fundamental that is about cloud, is that there's a shared service model, whether it's infrastructure as a service platform or software as a service. And that would, gauge how much they're in charge and how much you're in charge. And so it is not as much as the real tiger that's getting you is your own, mistakes or errors or lack of keeping up with things. And then the paper tiger that I think that everyone kind of worries about is this multi-tenancy and this, and the shared responsibility model. There's like, well, if they have all these other customers that may be my competitors, maybe there's a thing that they can like, no,
But the cross-tenant wounds are real though in some providers, maybe less so here at Google. But you read in the news. Yes, I know, Tim. I know why you're smiling. I mean, they're real everywhere, but they are more common in some other places. And I don't mean the business risk, but kind of cross-tenant wounds when one tenant sees what another tenant is doing. I mean, they're not super top of the list, but they're on the list, right?
I mean, it's a very and we need to understand that, here in the US, we keep just rattling off, Azure, AWS, GCP. But then, at the same level is, Alibaba and Oracle. And then there's 50 others across the US and the world that are kind of less focused on the kinds of things that we're working on. So is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? It is a lot less likely that happens than you using a poor credential or you releasing your credentials and your stuff.
Yes.
More likely
Very
to happen. True. We need to focus on the thing that's likely to happen. The tiger that's sitting there waiting to crouch and jump on us.
Okay. That actually makes total sense. So we kind of went through some tigers, paper tigers, elephants. Let me try to kind of transport us to the world where people still believe that cloud is this, creaky, risky thing. And they have some it's not even a paper tiger. It's almost like a toy paper tiger. I don't know. Like there are still people who think they can host Exchange better themselves than its vendor or something. Like, and I don't mean to pick an exchange, even though, of course, we're all kind of picking an exchange here and there, but just genuinely people who believe they can run services better than cloud providers. What do you tell them? Like, we can scream that these people are silly, but there's no point. These people exist and they insist. So what do you tell them as CISO with a great track record in the cloud?
Well, it's really about the difference between risk and security. And for years, when I used to do presentations, I talk about that risk is the calculation of the threat times impact times the likelihood times impact, right? And security is and that's a calculation. And we have quantitative risk analysis that come up and tell you, there is a likelihood of this type of event that will have this kind of impact. Mm-hmm. Security is an emotion. And that's technically the definition is freedom from fear or anxiety. And so we're talking about the difference between your fear of the unknown and the things that are out of your control, which is an emotional reaction, but it's not a risk reaction. Because if you look at it, and this happened when I was a virtual CISO 8 years ago, and I had a big conglomerate in Mexico that I was working with, and they're like, oh, we want to move our Exchange server, and we're going to have to sign off this stuff for Microsoft, and they're not going to let us know if there's all this stuff. And I'm like, listen, your Exchange server goes down like 2 or 3 times a month. It is flaky. It's out of date. It needs to be patched. You only have 2 people responsible for it. Offload that to somebody who has, it's like the quickest way to get the upgrade to the latest version is just go do it as a service. And this is not just, we're talking Exchange, but this is for everything, right? Anything that's a software as a service option, that is a much better option unless you have the staff who are experts at doing this. Even moving over to, to Google Mail is the same type of thing. It's like, hey, I could host, I don't know, is SendMail still around on Solaris? Anyway, and move that to Gmail. A lot better infrastructure. So it's about talking them down from the ledge of are you insecure because you don't understand it, as opposed to let's look at the reality of the likelihood, the impact, and the efforts that you need to maintain it to keep it stable. Because resiliency is just an important part of security as protection of data.
So I think there's a really interesting argument in all of that around expertise and learning cycles and delegating to people who are experts. Where does that argument stop? Like, is there a limit to where we should delegate security expertise to somebody else, or operational expertise?
So
I buy it, but I'm wondering what the limit is.
Yeah, no, all risk. It's a business decision. All risk can be accepted, mitigated, or transferred. CISOs are more like general counsels than we like to admit, in that we provide the input, we provide the options, we provide the data on here's the likelihood and here's the impact of it happening. The business is to take the decision. Technical people don't make business decisions. And so whether or not we go to some software as a service over something we're doing internally is a business decision. It's my responsibility to say, this is the improvements we're going to get. This is the likelihood of something not happening because of doing that, or likelihood it will when it do. And then they can make the decision to choose to or not. So that transferring of that risk to a third party, as well as, and you're talking about like experts, the challenge, it's a whole other, at RSA for the Cloud Security Alliance, Summit on Monday, I was on the opening keynote panel where we talked about workforce development, talk about the right people. The reality is most of the cloud people and organizations are refugees from network or network security applications or infrastructure or other things that they kind of merge right into the cloud because that's a new thing and they have an interest in doing that. There is no...
They're cloud tourists at worst, cloud immigrants, or at worst cloud tourists. I think we've been trying to use the term a few times, yes.
And so it's refugees to add to the mix. It's great.
Yes. And so it's very, very hard to find someone who was like, has been doing it for 10 years because they happen to be some company that is native for 10 years and they've worked on all this thing. And they're very expensive and very hard to find. Everyone wants them. So the reality is the business decision, whether or not I have the resources and the effort and expertise to be able to maintain the security, the resiliency, and everything I need to make my business run, or whether it's a better business decision to offload it to somebody who has that expertise inherent.
Okay, I really like this answer. I want to transition to a more technical question from here, which is talking about how do we reason with people who want to copy and paste their on-prem security approach to the cloud? How do we help these people?
Can I have a short rant?
Yes, please.
A very short one. It's just crazy sometimes when people show up and say ideas, NDR, SIM, log analysis, antivirus, load it up into a VM, shove it into the cloud. I'm secure. And
So how do we
like
help?
hair pulling.
Right.
Yeah, but Anton, they were right for 30 years with that, and now they're not. So how do we help them appreciate that?
Right. It's funny because in the Cloud Security Alliance circles, we talk about how a lot of times people say exactly what you say, Anton, and we're like, yeah, that's not how it works. And it's like, that's the T-shirt. That's not how it works. It's like, oh, I need an IDS for the cloud and a SIM tool for it. It's like, that's not how it works. Well, Tim, the reality is that, some people, it's kind of like their first step, right? Is like, I'm going to forklift what I have in a data center into virtual machines in the cloud. And then all the stack that they're comfortable with, like Anton said, is going to remain there and they feel better. Again, security versus risk. They feel secure because it's something they're safe with. And there are a lot of people who are stuck in...
It's a fancy security theater. It's a fancy form of security theater.
Yeah, I don't know if it's theater or
no. It's comfort. It's there are people
comfort.
Who I like to. When I was a virtual CISO, I ran into folks all the time who were stuck in suspended animation or arrested development. They were comfortable with how the architecture looked in 2013 or 2015. And that's how they were comfortable with that, with proprietary platforms and everything. And what you just described is the same thing. Is I may take it into a proprietary virtualization platform that I feel comfortable with that still feels like persistent servers to me, and I'm comfortable with that. And so but it's not taking advantage of all of the benefits of the cloud and the elasticity and the on-demand and the self-provisioning and all the things to be able to that the cloud offers with temporary workloads and containers and expansion. You lose all of that, but they're not ready for it. And so it's
so what do you tell them apart from this is step one? Like, what is apart from you're okay if it's step one, but keep walking? Is this the advice?
Well, it depends on, it's a business decision. I keep coming back to that. Okay. Do I have the time? Do I have the runway to be able to say, I need to re-architect these applications to be in containers, in temporary workloads with different, API driven, the whole thing that we have, cloud native applications in modern cloud native ways is a heavy lift. And you may not have anyone who knows how to do this, and you may be too expensive to do it, or you don't have the time. It's like, listen, I got to get out of the data center. It's cheaper to move up there than paying twice the price for the servers and the literal space and the cooling to move it up there. Fine. Get it there as a starting point, and then start to kind of move to take the smaller applications, do it cloud native, feel good about it, and then start expanding. Very rare is because you also have a business that you need to run, right? Is you need to have dual modes where I still have this legacy thing that's going, and I can't just we're going to shut down for 6 months while I hire a bunch of people to put this in and make it work. And then now we have the nirvana of all the cloud things. So there's a lot, as a technical people, we see it. But technical people don't make business decisions. That's my mantra. It's the business decision. I just kind of say, how are we going to transition? And then they have to accept it and fund it and get the resources to do it.
That mantra about technical people don't make business decisions reminds me of the IBM statement back in the 60s. Computer can't be held accountable, so it must never make a management decision. I don't know if that's an actual IBM quote, but it floats around the internet as one.
Right. Well, ChatGPT is taking that the different direction now, right?
Yeah, right. I think what Rick said in there, though, was really interesting, Anton. It leads into the next question in the doc really nicely.
I think it's the hybrid part, but also what I really wanted to say is that once you figured it out, sort of, for one cloud, bam, 2 more clouds fall on you. And in rare cases, maybe more than 2. So I almost feel for people who sort of figured out cloud and suddenly they're in multi-cloud. And of course, their on-prem is still being dragged behind them. So they're in hybrid cloud where they try to use some cloudy thinking on-premise with mixed results. So what do you tell people in later steps of the journey where they have to deal with more than one cloud and still deal with on-prem? What's the recipe for not failure? I think I don't think we have recipes for success, but how about the recipe for not failure?
Well, understanding the risks of these. So when we talk about multi-cloud, it's important to kind of keep in mind that not everything is infrastructure as a service and cloud native greenfield cloud native applications, right? We have the Fortune 100 companies, and we're 5 million others who don't have acres of data center space that have this issue. Anybody in the 5 million, 99.99% of companies in the US are less than 500 people. Everything should be in the cloud. Don't even bother trying to do it otherwise. So when we talk about that small percentage that has data center space, has legacy applications in there and in cloud. And then the second thing is when we talk about cloud, it's software as a service. It is, or platform as a service. And the multi-cloud is usually like there's maybe software as a service because you're using either, Gmail or Office 365 for your mail, and then you may have applications in Azure, or AWS, and so it's not like I have applications in all of them where I'm doing development in all of them. I'm using software as a service or platform in one. I'm doing development in the other. I may be doing something else in the other. So all of those things need to be in play. That's not all the same. So I'm on the editorial panel for CIS critical security controls. And one of the things that we've always said, and I've been part of it for 10 years, number one is asset management. Know what you have, because I can't protect what I don't know about. And then the basic thing, covering the basic well in all of them. Asset management, data protection, configuration management, vulnerability management, identity management. If I'm having all those things, and the challenge for multiple cloud is because often, and the bigger the company is, the more people are involved. There are different teams. You have the Azure team, you have the GCP team, you have the AWS team. You don't have somebody managing all of them. And so particularly not from, you can federate the identities, but it's harder to federate privileged identities in that. And so it's kind of like, and then you have the one on premise, right? So you have to be able to just know what you're dealing with, and the assets is for all those different things. My applications, my APIs, my data, where's my data flow, where's my where's my backups, how's my backup going? Just kind of like having a handle and focus on the fundamentals and make sure you get those done right, instead of trying to do the extreme, which is like, oh my gosh, I need to have some kind of thing to watch this in case this little thing happens or whatever. Focus on the fundamentals first.
Rick, I hate to say this, but you're not making it sound easy.
Oh no, it's not easy.
The fundamentals was
what do you mean? Buy CSPM isn't the answer? No,
and that's the thing that we need to keep saying. It's like there is no easy button for it. This is hard, and you have to work on it, and just kind of accept that this is hard. And anyone who's going to come to you with a magic box and say it's easy is lying. It is hard work, and that's why my main rant that I have is like this difference between the haves and have-nots. You have the Fortune 500 and 5 million other companies. I'm in a Fortune 25 company. We are heavily resourced. We're heavily funded. We have lots of people. We got things covered, but we're in 0.00001% of just the U.S. companies. And look at the M-Trends reports that your organization Mandiant just released a couple weeks ago, and you see that in Europe and in Asia Pacific, it's much worse from a security standpoint. Even if the one metric that you look at is when incidents happen, is it being notified by a third party? That just number one thing is third parties are notifying you that you have a problem before you notify it. This is a big challenge, and that's why we're not doing well as an industry, is because it's hard, and we keep being fooled that it's easy. And there's, of course, not enough people to do it, and the people are not distributed properly, and it's a whole other thing.
Often everybody our guests fill me with optimism.
No.
Today I'm not.
No, but there is a path. There is a path. So you're right. I'm being realistic. The path is, again, focus on the fundamentals, and it doesn't take a lot of money. It doesn't take a lot of time to just say, I need to focus on making sure I know what's out there, and I'll crowdsource all the stuff on my premise in the cloud. They know everything is on the cloud. Just got to go to the right portals to get it. That's what I love about the cloud, is nothing happens without being recorded, as like on-prem, and that's great.
Oh my God, that's a fundamental difference that I think some people fail to appreciate between the cloud providers and anywhere else, is the robustness and survivability of the logging infrastructure.
Right. Yes. Now, on incident response side, sometimes those logs are not easily accessible. Sometimes they get changed with the format there is. Sometimes they're not complete, and sometimes timing is off. But it's there. Yeah. So,
but you certainly don't have like log delivery issues and endpoint log tampering issues. There's fundamental advantages to a cloud operating model.
Right.
Yes.
But if you come back down to the fundamentals and just say, okay, I need it, and particularly and that's why I'm saying, like, if you don't have the resource, just let the cloud, let that shared service model come into play. You're just dealing with the application, or you're just dealing with the credentials that you're getting. You're setting it up. You're doing low code, no code modification, as little as possible, so that all of the real heavy lifting of the meta structure is being handled by somebody else who has the resources to be able to do it. And so the path for people who don't have the resources is exactly kind of what you had said, Tim, is like, what's that line of outsourcing? If you don't have the resources, then leverage and lean on the outsourcing of the software as a service and all these other things, and then manage services to be able to manage it. If you do have the resources, then it's all on you. And the more of that responsibility is on you to be able to have the right people to do the right things and get those things done. But, we've made it a little easier to color by numbers in cloud, and because it's very point and click kind of thing. Security, again, just think about the fundamentals. Am I protecting my data properly? Am I protecting my credentials properly? Am I using good credentials? Am I using multifactorial? These are all fundamental things. And if you look at the hacks that happen, the most common ones, and the ransomware, and even the ones related to the cloud, are not related to cloud insecurity. It's related to the stuff I said at the very beginning, those top 11
Human
things,
error.
which are human error.
Yep.
So if nothing else, reduce human error. Do more QA.
Reduce human error. So we've gotten a couple of questions in on the live stream, and I want to pivot real quick to those. And it's a hard pivot. There's no easy way to do it.
Nope, I'm fine with that.
Two questions I think are interesting. One from a former guest and other podcast host. What regulatory scheme do you dream of? Like, what would help you from a regulatory standpoint? Maybe do your job better or sleep better at night. How could regulation help?
No, another 30 minutes. How about that?
No. This is a 45-second answer. I love this question. Thank you. Honestly, is if we can get support to that 5 million companies who don't have resources, whether they're tax incentives, whether there's discounts, whether there's open up the GSA schedule to buy stuff very cheaply, whether there is incentives, grants to securities providers, the more we can help this 5 million other people that don't have resources, money, and time, all of us will be more secure.
That's a really
what can we do to be able to focus
That's a really
on
good
them?
answer. Wow. I did not expect that. How about that?
And it really was 45 seconds. Second question from Trevon Pascal. What's your approach on threat management across hybrid and multi-cloud? And I think this is interesting too, because, well, I'm curious about your take. What fraction of threats that we're seeing out there really do span environments, and what fraction of threats that we're dealing with are in a single environment?
Yep. Great question. But the wrong question. But I know your answer. And so the question is, because it's not just about the environment, it's about the organization, the size, the geographic, what country they're in, how big they are. All these things equate to who are the threat actors. When I was a virtual CISO, I was CISO all around the world. The actors in South America, we never saw those in the US. So ones in the US, we never saw in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. So the core to the answer is, it's not about threat management. This is the other thing that I kind of like, beat the drum of. It's about fixing things. We have no shortage of finding vulnerability. We have no shortage of tooling to tell us where problems are. And that's what the security team does. We have a challenge in fixing them. And security team doesn't fix things. IT fixes them. The infrastructure team fixes them.
But in the
people
cloud
who are not security
though,
fix
right?
them.
A little bit.
No, it's not. This is really interesting. Go on, Rick. I like this.
Because we need to make it as easy for them to fix the problems than us finding them. We need to give them the reason. We need to give them the information. We can't just say, hey, I ran a vulnerability scan, or I did some, surface management thing. I'm going to throw over the fence this report, go fix it all. And they're like, listen, we're assigned other things. I don't know how this is real. Have you prioritized these things? Like, we need to do better on our side to say, this is do these 5 things, and here's the link to it, or here's the pseudocode, or here's the code to add in, or here's configuration change, and I'm going to write the script for you to be able to execute the script, and I'm going to stick it into my workflow management system to press a button, it'll fix it, press this button to back it out. It's about focusing. The short answer is focus on fixing problems, not finding more problems.
Interesting. Okay, that's another surprisingly deep answer for what seemed like a simple question.
I like
we've
that a
got
lot
2 minutes left. I can go over. can you go over, Rick, or do we need to?
Yep, I'm good.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Anton, why don't you ask the next one then?
Yeah, so this question has been my obsession for the last maybe 3-4 months. So I was really waiting for Rick to show up on the podcast so I can ask him. And I'm not joking. I'm not exaggerating. It's really it. Because you mentioned this whole haves and have-nots, kind of people with resources, people without resources. We do see companies with literally a security team of 0 adopting cloud, and sometimes adopting cloud at a large scale. So it's almost like your advice about, hey, security team focus on X instead of Y. Well, they ain't got any. There is no security team. So what is your best cloud security advice to an organization without a security team?
Right. And I'm responsible for our subsidiaries, and some of the subsidiaries don't have any security folks, and we are acting as their managed security service provider in the core company. And so the answer is like, get some somehow. I mean, it should be just like we may have an outside counsel, get a virtual or fractional CISO, get some support, even if it's part-time, get some expertise, because it's not possible to be able to run a company safely and securely from harm from contracts, laws, regulations, et cetera, without some kind of counsel externally or part-time or whatever. It's the same thing we're dealing with security. If you have IT folks and no security people, even if whatever you can afford to get 20% of a fractional CISO to help you figure things out, you need to have that. And that's just kind of like the bottom line is we can't afford not to have some kind of, just like legal expertise, we can't afford not to have some kind of security expertise, even on a part-time basis.
Okay. I would take
because
that.
it's a business
I expected
risk.
You give me some magical answer about, just do X and you're good. But
no, because it is not easy.
Fine.
It's not necessarily an easy thing. I mean, there's fundamental things. You can go through some of the standard control frameworks and kind of say, okay, make sure I have these things in place, make sure I have this. But, it gets more complicated at that. But somebody needs to come in because, one of the challenges that I had when I was a virtual CISO, I did a lot of work in helping people hire the first CISO. And the biggest challenge is they would hire the wrong person, or they want to hire the wrong person because they can't tell the difference between a good one and a bad one. And there's a confidence bias in security people. And there's also like a technology bias with usually the head of technology that interviews them. And, most people don't need a tool jockey to come in there and buy a bunch of tools and put them in and configure them, when really they need is governance. And they need to be able to link the business to the technology, understand what the real risks are, understand what would be a bad day for the company, and then have the kind of infrastructure and the security architecture to help reduce that ability to have a bad day. And the two things I saw most missing as a virtual CISO was A, lack of governance, which is the business and the technology being linked together from a risk standpoint, and two, an instant response process. What are you going to do if something goes wrong? Because that's going to go wrong. And a lot of people were well instrumented. They had all the right tools. They were all blinking. They were doing they may not be logging anywhere. Certainly no one's looking at them. But if someone calls them and says, you have this problem, they don't know what to do. And so that's where you need to have, even if it's external support, even if it's part-time, just somebody who knows what they're doing to kind of help you.
You said something really interesting in there as well about the skills needed to be a successful CISO versus other things in the security chain, other roles in the security chain. I think that's a topic that probably merits its own podcast, Anton. We should have a long
other discussion
about that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Rick, I hate to do this, but we're just about at time and I do have to run eventually. So I want to ask our traditional closing question. First, do you have one tip maybe for helping organizations improve their cloud security outcomes other than focus on the fundamentals? And two, do you have recommended reading? And the recommended reading can be anything that you think people would benefit from reading of any sort. Except
and we know we have sizable YouTube presence. We're going to put a link to that for sure. But I would appreciate more guidance in this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when I talked about those refugees that become the crowd people, the number one skill I'd look for is script writers. Because particularly among all the different clouds, it's like when you can do scripting, when you can do PowerShell, you can do Python, you can do, that will make your life so much easier, because this is not just a point and click. Point and click will get you somewhere, but scripting stuff to fix things, respond to things, pull things is going to get you head and shoulders above where, you would be otherwise. So that's number one. And then number two is, what was the second question? I'm sorry.
Do you have a Got a,
source.
Reading
I would say,
materials,
yeah.
anything.
Reading material. I would say go to the Cloud Security Alliance. The Cloud Security Alliance has so much free information available to download that is well researched by everybody in the industry. They've been around for 13 years, and that of their own stuff on zero trust. They have recent stuff on AI, on generative AI. They have all kinds of things that are free. I mean, they give way too much away free, but it's great because they're supporting the community because they're so big. And that's not just because I'm very active with them. It is a great resource for all things cloud across all the boards. And so that's where I would say if you want to have a good cloud resource, that's the first place to go.
Well, Rick, I really appreciate the thoughtful take today. And you're right. There's many hours more discussion we could have here. So, Rick, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody on LinkedIn, thank you for logging on and joining us for half an hour today. We will release this as a regular show podcast in the future, and you can find it on our YouTube channel as well.
Thanks a lot, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so the
don't close the. I have to. We can.